Welcome back. All right. On the topic of underrated players, I do like to have this discussion from time to time because I think there are players who play pretty darn well at this whole hockey thing that don't get as much recognition as others. And I think that that's something that in videos like this, it's kind of fun to go over, look at, and say, yeah, no, these guys are underrated. Now, the definition of underrated seems pretty simple, and yet when I do this list, there will be plenty of other names brought up. There will be some saying that this guy's overrated, doesn't belong in the list. But again, that is why with list videos, there's a comment section. You guys can let me know who you think is the most underrated player on each team. And I did have a hard time with some teams. But let's go ahead and go through division by division here, the Metro, the Pacific, the Central, and finishing off with the Atlantic. So, in the Carolina Hurricanes case, now, I always hear about Jacob Slavin. I think at this point we all know who Slavin is, and I think it's at the expense of Brett Pesce. Brett Pesce's numbers this year are fantastic. They're actually better than Slavin's. And so, while Slavin deserves every amount of recognition he gets at this point, I think Pesce now is the one that's underrated of the two. Columbus, I went with a defenseman who's off to a good start this year. I don't know how long he's going to be on the underrated side of things, but I'm going with Andrew Peeke. Andrew Peeke has had a very good start for the Columbus Blue Jackets. He was, of course, brought along slowly by them, and as a defenseman, it's easy to kind of end up being underrated to start things out. But for Peeke, I think he's been very good for Columbus, and they haven't had a lot of bright spots, but I really haven't seen much complaining when it comes to Peeke, although the blue line in general there have been complaints about. New Jersey, I'm going with a player who I thought it was funny too. I saw a post by Jay Fresh, not Josh. I'm not sure why I'm going with Josh here. I'm making up hockey players now. That'd be a great video, right? 32 underrated players, and I make up all the names. John Marino. So John Marino doesn't have the offensive side of the game that people might have expected from him based on early in his career, but defensively, he's really quite good. Marino saving a goal. I think it was yesterday. I'm writing on the board. He's saving a goal. Marino's been very good for New Jersey. The offensive side, again, the flashy side's not really where one might have expected coming out of his rookie year, but defensively, he's really been quite excellent. So, on to the New York Islanders. On the New York Islanders side of things, I went a little bit different with this one. I went with a player that I think a lot of us know just how good Elias Sorokin is, but should we start talking about Sorokin as one of the top 3, top 5 goaltenders in the entire league? His numbers, absolutely remarkable. The New York Islanders now back at 500 in no small part because Sorokin is fantastic. Not that there's anything wrong with Varlamov, but Sorokin is at that next level, and is it time that he gets more consideration as one of the best goalies in the league? You guys can let me know your thoughts. For the New York Rangers, I went with the name I've put up here before. And again, not a lot of flash and dash when it comes to Keandre Miller. Just a really solid defensive defenseman who does have some offense to his game. And I'm always impressed with Miller when I watch him play. This is one guy that, for the New York Rangers, I think is on the underrated side. They've got a good blue line, absolutely. Of course, you got Igor in net, that definitely helps. But Keandre Miller, I think, has been very, very good. On the Philadelphia side of things, there weren't a lot of players that I thought would suit the underrated part, but I'm going with Carter Hart. Carter Hart's numbers have been fantastic. And the last couple of seasons in Philadelphia, he's taken a lot of heat for play that I don't think was quite his fault. I don't think it was his fault that Philadelphia was as bad as they were last year, but as the last line of defense, as the guy the puck's going in behind, you are going to be the one that gets a lot of the blame. But yeah, Carter Hart's had a remarkable turnaround thus far. I don't know how far it can go. I don't know how far Philadelphia can go before it falls off the tracks, but maybe they can keep this going a lot longer than any of us would have thought. Pittsburgh, going with a name that I've mentioned before. Feels like going back 6 years. I've mentioned him a lot on this channel. And that's Rickard Rakell. Rakell's been really solid. And in a game in Vancouver last night where Pittsburgh didn't play well for large stretches here and there, Rakell was good throughout the game. And I really think Rickard Rakell is one that's flying under the radar because you've got so many star players, right, playing for the Penguins. So for me, it's Raquel. For Washington, Nick Dowd. Remember when Nick Dowd didn't qualify to be a fourth line center for the Vancouver Canucks? The Canucks decided to go in another direction. I still kick them for doing that. Nick Dowd, absolutely one of the best fourth line centers in the game. Now he's got a few goals to start the season. His work ethic is excellent. And yeah, there's a team in Vancouver that, while Amon has been good, I think Nick Dowd would be an improvement over Amon. No offense to Amon, of course. So we get into the Pacific Division now. We go to Anaheim. And this is one of those maybe because. So very often the backup goaltender will be your most popular player. This goes back to the 80s that I've heard this. Anthony Stolarz may very well be a pick for me because Gibson's off to a rough start. But Stolarz has been good. So on an Anaheim team that has had its struggles. I'm wearing Dallas. I'm looking at Dallas on the board because that's the first game up. Dallas comes out. Anthony Stolarz, I think, has been quite good for Anaheim. Now, again, it might just be that Gibson's had a really rough start, so it makes Stolarz look better by comparison. But for a team that's 1-6-1, finding somebody who's underrated on that team where there's a lot of guys who aren't producing very well, I went with Stolarz as a result. For Calgary, Michael Backlund. His shorthanded game is excellent. Speed's good. Checking forward. Yep. He's able to do kind of a little bit of everything. And yet, I don't hear a lot of praise for Backlund outside of Calgary fans. Calgary fans know. And if you are a fan of these teams, you likely know exactly what I'm talking about. This video is more designed for, hey, these are guys who aren't being talked about outside the fan base as much as I think they should be. And Backlund, to me, is the guy for Calgary. His numbers offensively may never be fantastic, but as a two-way forward, he is quite good. He should get Selke consideration, but however, Lindholm might end up being the one that gets more Selke consideration. The difference this year from last year, though, could be Lindholm's off to a rough start. Maybe that gives Backlund more of the spotlight. For Edmonton, I'm going with the name I've written on this board over the last 6 months. Ryan McLeod. So they need production off the wings. Got it. McLeod has actually provided them with some decent production on the wings so far. 3 goals to this stage of the season. And I like McLeod a lot. I think he gets very little attention in a market where you've got bigger names on the wings. You've got, some young prospects that are higher caliber, or not higher caliber is the wrong way of putting it. They have a higher profile than McLeod. I think there's more offense there than we've seen, and he's on a 30-goal pace. For the Kings, I know I've mentioned this guy before. Again, work ethic makes a big difference, and Trevor Moore has shown that he'll do the work. He'll do the work that it takes to get to that next level. He's been excellent for the LA Kings. Almost point per game right now this season. I don't expect that to continue, but he's an excellent passer, really solid, smart forward, and yeah, the Kings did really well in that trade. In general, they've picked up some guys from Toronto that have really been quite good for them. For San Jose, another former Leaf here. So San Jose's had a 3-7 start, but I will say that the 3 wins, James Reimer is part of the reason why they're still competitive. James Reimer's numbers have been quite good, and he's playing like a bona fide starter. So maybe he would be a backup in most other locations, sure, but he is playing like a good starting goaltender, not like a stopgap. Like it feels like for Chicago, they went out and got a couple stopgaps. San Jose has 2 legit NHL goaltenders, and Reimer is the legit starter. So I think his numbers have been better than one might think when you look at the team's record. For Seattle, so this is something I've talked about before, and I'll talk about it again. So when we talk about the expansion draft, what comes up? Why didn't they take Tarasenko? My answer to that is, why not take Vince Dunn? Vince Dunn was a cheaper option. He's an excellent top 4 defenseman. Teams aren't giving those guys away. If you want a winger that's making a lot of money on an expiring contract, odds are those guys are going to be available in trade anyways. So to me, the expansion draft, picking up Vince Dunn from St. Louis, to me, no-brainer, good move, smart move. You get a guy who's cheaper, a player who is able to do a lot for you and would cost you a lot more in trade than Tarasenko would. Because again, this summer, they could pick up Tarasenko as a free agent. So Looking at the long game, it made a lot more sense to pick up Vince Dunn. That's one of those things. And Dunn has been very good for Seattle. I really like him a lot, and I do think St. Louis misses him. Vancouver, and I know I've mentioned this player before, so I apologize for any repetitiveness on this list, but I'm going to mention Luke Schenn. The blue line of Vancouver gets ridiculed, and rightfully so. Really, in all honesty, it's understandable. And this year injuries have just decimated it. So it was a thin blue line that was, maybe good enough to be middle of the pack, and under the right system that you might be able to get that goals against into the top 10, especially if Demko was playing as Demko can. But at this point in the season, Demko hasn't been Demko. Their blue line has been beset by injuries. But Luke Schenn's been very good throughout, and I think he's provided more use for Vancouver than they probably could have dreamed when they picked him up. Vegas, another defenseman. Pretty sure I've mentioned him before. So you guys can act surprised, but it's Zach Whitecloud. And there were a couple of different defensemen. I thought about Haig, but I thought, I'll go with Whitecloud. Don't hear much about Whitecloud in general, but he's a solid defensive defenseman. A little bit of offense there as well. And has been one of those Vegas Golden Knights players they didn't trade as a youngster. They've traded a lot of good young players, but the guys they've kept, Haig, Whitecloud, look good. Lecision's had his moments as well, so maybe there's some hope for the future for Vegas. Maybe they won't fall off the cliff when their veterans start to tail off. At the very least, that cliff isn't apparently coming up this year. They're 7-2 on the season. So now we move into the Central Division, and with the Arizona Coyotes, it's no problem finding a player who's underrated, because people might just look at the Arizona Coyotes roster and say, well, they're more of an AHL team. No. J.J. Mosier is a very good defenseman, solid player. And while they might trade Ghost, they might trade Chychrun, I would be shocked if Mosier ended up being moved at any point, because Mosier's been one of their more solid defensemen at both ends of the ice. And I think there's a lot of potential with Mosier as well. So, good on him. For Chicago, I'm going with a player who's a former Tampa Bay Lightning member who has fit in quite well with the Chicago Blackhawks. Taylor Radish continues a tradition of players leaving Tampa and producing quite well after they've left Tampa, showing just how much depth is in that organization. Radish has been quite good. I would be kind of surprised if Chicago doesn't hold on to him while they're doing this rebuild, because it's an inexpensive contract and he's a solid player. Both of those things make him attractive to keep through a rebuild. For Colorado's not easy because they just won the Stanley Cup. So, and of course, Nichushkin's not underrated anymore, so I'm going with Arturi Lehkonen. Lehkonen has some skills. He is shown an offensive side of his game with Colorado that didn't show up in Montreal, not like it has with Colorado. Understandable, the Avs have a much better offense than Montreal, but I've been surprised at just how well Lehkonen's done, and I think, again, with the number of star players you have in Colorado, it is easy for Lehkonen to kind of fly under the radar. So kudos to him for hitting the ground running, and he's done quite well with Colorado. For Dallas, I went a little bit off board with this one, even though I'm putting it on the board. So Ty Dellandrea doesn't have any points yet for Dallas, but I've been really impressed with him and his checking. I've been really impressed with some of the moves he's been making out there while they haven't shown up on the score sheet yet. I think he's an underrated bottom six forward. He's one of those guys that it feels like has evolved his game now, so where he'll have a regular job in the National Hockey League, and he may never be a guy you would take in a fantasy league for sure, but he's got some skill, and there's some upside there, and I'm impressed with his work ethic. Minnesota, speaking of work ethic, so it would have been Marcus Foligno, but it's Brandon Duhaime. Brandon Duhaime, he can fight, he can hit, he can score, he can do a little bit of everything. He's got energy. He's not, he doesn't have, his speed's not a detriment to the team or anything. He's quite good, and he's definitely belonging on this board as an underrated player, because again, unless you watch Minnesota, you might be thinking, Brandon who? Brandon Duhaime is quite good, definitely deserves the attention of fans everywhere, and hopefully he gets that this year. He's remarkable to watch. So, yeah, Duhaime, really hardworking player. Okay, Nashville. On the Nashville side of things, keeping in mind that they've had a slow start to the season, but I'm going with Yakov Trenin. Again, work ethic, yes. Able to play the physical game, absolutely. A little bit of offense there, sure. So Trenin, whatever you're looking for, he's able to provide. Again, it's not like he's an overly expensive player, and because there are bigger names in Nashville, this is again a guy who can fly under the radar, and I think plays quite well. For St. Louis, I went with a defenseman here. Now, St. Louis is off to a really rough start. If you look at plus-minus numbers and just in general up and down the lineup, guys are having a hard time. But Nico Mikkola kind of stands out as a guy who's not had as hard of a time numbers-wise as others. And I do think he's been an underrated member of that blue line for a while. I know there's been times where he's been the number 7. I know there's been times where he's not really seen as being, part of the plan when it comes to your top 6. But I think Mikkola is making an argument right now that he belongs there. And so when everybody's healthy in St. Louis, I would expect Mikkola to have a pretty fortified spot on that blue line. I think he's been quite good. For Winnipeg, defenseman again. So Winnipeg with back-to-back wins, all of a sudden they're 5-3. Brendan Dillon, excellent defensive game. I was really impressed with him last night too. He ends up getting a secondary assist on a goal last night. But yeah, Dillon does provide a little bit of everything. Remembering when he was in Dallas, I was upset when Dallas didn't keep him around. And when I see the way he's playing in Winnipeg, I still think, Dallas could use a defenseman like Brendan Dillon. And again, if you don't watch Winnipeg play, you might not be aware of how much they look to him and how useful he is to them. But he is actually quite good. All right, now we get to the Atlantic Division. For Boston, hard to find somebody who's underrated. This is obviously a roster that is kind of torn apart often by just people looking through. Like everybody knows all the players on the Boston Bruins because generally either you're a Bruins fan or you hate them. There doesn't seem to be in between. Jake DeBrusk. Jake DeBrusk to me is underrated at this point because we talk about Marchand, Pasternak, and all these other players. But meanwhile, DeBrusk's almost a point per game right now. He has been remarkable, and that's after a pretty good season last year while under the cloud of wanting to be traded out of Boston. He's rescinded that trade offer, of course, or trade request, of course. But, yeah, DeBrusk's been fantastic this year. Looks great. For Buffalo, I kind of took the easy way out with this one. I'm going with Alex Tuch. All the talk about Dahlin, of course, Tage Thompson's contract means people are going to talk about him. Tuch's got 6 goals. Alex Tuch right now looks like an absolute star, and while Vegas has got off to a great start, it's a shame they don't have Alex Tuch in the lineup. That Tuch was part of the price paid to get Eichel, and Eichel's been very good this year for Vegas as well. I could have justified putting Eichel up there as an underrated player right now because I do think there are those who are underrating him. But Alex Tuch has been fantastic for Buffalo. I do hope it continues to be great if he had like a 40-goal season. That would be amazing, wouldn't it? Detroit. There were a few I looked at for Detroit. But ultimately, I felt like Adam Ernie needs a little bit of love in this video. Adam Ernie has been excellent for Detroit throughout their early start, even while things have kind of fallen apart the last few games. Adam Ernie's been quite good. I really do appreciate him working through it. He's had his ups and downs throughout his career. I think he might be on the verge of having the best season of his career. And that would be great for him and for the Wings. All right, Florida. Now, obviously back in the day it would have been Barkov and then it was Huberdeau. Well, these guys are paid really well. I don't think we can call Barkov or Huberdeau underrated anymore. So, with that in mind, how about a guy they picked up on waivers? And now if they put Gustav Forsling on waivers, we would all wonder if they were completely crazy. Have you lost your mind? Gustav Forsling's been excellent. And his position on this team, he's definitely got a higher position now because Uyghur's gone, Ekblad's on the injured reserve. So Forsling plays a more prominent role, and he's done quite well. Forsling's been excellent. So, yeah, for Florida, Gustav Forsling, really, really solid player. And I don't hear him get talked about much outside of, if you're watching a Florida game and listening to Florida announcers. For Montreal, and again, this is a team that gets overanalyzed into the ground, so it's hard to find somebody who's actually underrated. but I'm going to go with Jake Allen. Jake Allen's put up very good numbers so far this year. He's looked good. So while all the talk is of Carey Price and of rebuilding and everything, part of the reason Montreal has a good record is their goaltending's been quite good. So I could have put Montembeault up there, but I'm going to put up Jake Allen because I think that, you know, a lot of us believe that his days of being a starter were pretty much done when he ended up in Montreal. Maybe not. He is a really legit goaltender that right now has put up some pretty good numbers for Montreal. For Ottawa, player that I've mentioned in videos when I'm doing reviews for a while, I'll put him up here again, and that's Artem Zub. Zub is very popular with Sens fans. Every time he touches the puck, you hear the Zub chant, which is fun. You know, that's part of the reason it becomes popular chant, because it's fun. Sounds like booing, but it's not. But Zub has been quite good for them, and it's a blue line that really has various players playing their roles. Zub's been playing his role very, very well for about a year and a half now, where he's really come into his own. And so, yeah, this season he's been as advertised. But again, outside of Ottawa fans, I can understand if might be a name you look at and go, who? So for Tampa Bay, another team that gets analyzed quite a bit. You know, 3 Stanley Cup finals will do that in a row. Cal Foote. Cal Foote might never be as good as his father was. And hey, I mean, you know, very few physical defensemen live up to the last name Foote. But Cal Foote's been pretty good for Tampa. And so they've brought him along slowly. I get the feeling that by the end of this year, he'll be a mainstay in their top 6. And yeah, he is able to hit. He's good defensive defenseman. And I think that Cal Foote's just another one of those guys. Tampa Bay has seemingly an endless supply of young players that can come up when they have to trade guys out. Like they lose Palat. Well, they're fine. Although they are off to the 4-4 start, which we do consider slow by their standards. And last but not least, the Toronto Maple Leafs, which means the next time I do a 32-team video, I'll move them over here. And for Toronto, again, remembering how absolutely analyzed into the ground Toronto can be, I'm going with David Kampf. Bottom 6 forward who's provided some goal scoring for them. And again, not much was expected when he was added by Toronto last year, but he's been good. And it feels like he's non-negotiable in terms of who may or may not be in the lineup. If he's healthy, he's playing. And so for David Kampf, I think he's done quite well with the opportunity provided to him by the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he's looked good. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.